Before anything important is said, we're going to start with a recitation of a poem and a reading. Then we will talk.
Thanks. Yeah, so in 2014, The Guardian reported that Israel banned a radio advert listing the names of children killed in Gaza. So I wrote, don't mention the children. Don't name the dead children. The people must not know the names of the dead children. The names of the children must be hidden. The children must be nameless. The children must leave this world having no names. No one must know the names of the dead children. No one must say the names of the dead children. No one must even think that the children have names. People must understand that it would be dangerous to know the names of the children. The people must be protected from knowing the names of the children. The names of the children could spread like wildfire. The people would not be safe if they knew the names of the children. Don't name the dead children. Don't remember the dead children. Don't think of the dead children. Don't say dead children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Now, Sheela.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really powerful partly because names are about who we actually are, and that's partly why I wrote my book. And I'm just going to read from the beginning of What's in a Name, and it's about. I start with a bit about my name, and one of the chapters is about an explanation of my name. The story of my name begins on a cool autumnal day in London. I imagine my parents in the hospital ward where I was born in October 1967. As he's trying to think of a name for his newborn daughter, my father, Balaji, looks outside through the windows, and the leaves are a vibrant mix of orange and yellow. He's still getting used to the colours of autumn in Britain. My parents are young and in love. Although they had an arranged marriage, they knew each other from living on the same small street, surrounded by ponds and jungle, in a small town in West Bengal. In a black and white photo, my father is smooth-skinned and handsome. It was taken in one of those old-fashioned photography studios in India, and he's looking into the camera, smiling, a bit like a 50s Indian film star. But now, here they are in Hammersmith Hospital at the start of a new life together in London. It's 1967, winter is approaching, and it's a few months before Enoch Powell will make his infamous Rivers of Blood speech, warning about the dangers of immigrants pouring into Britain. And so, these two young Indians have a baby daughter born on British soil. They bring to this moment in that hospital the world they grew up with in India and the huge psychological upheavals of adjusting to life in Britain in the 1960s. Their decision about what to call me will be influenced by their own experience of living here with their own Indian names.
Thank you, Sheela. We're trying to do something which is rarely done, especially in English settings. We're trying to dispute Shakespeare. Shakespeare said, "What's in a name?" Through Juliet, of course. I could be Michael, Michael could be Som. What we are trying to say is, names are important. They carry histories, oral histories, and once we look at them carefully, we learn about ourselves and we when we mention our names to somebody else, we're telling them a lot. All three of us have PhDs. So we'll talk about methods, archaeology, excavating our names, and how we do it. So we go back to what we have called this session, What's in a Name? Michael, you go first.
Okay, so my name is Michael Wayne Rosen. Yes, I thought, yes, it always gets a laugh. It's quite offensive, really. There you are, just, I just say my name and people laugh. You see, it's a form of hidden racism there, you see, that's right. And it's the Wayne, isn't it? That's the one that got you going. Yes, that's right. Because how could somebody looking like me, very sober person from age 79, have the name Wayne? Well, so let's start with that one. My father was born in America. His parents schlepped, that means dragged themselves, schlepped to and fro across the Atlantic and ended up splitting off from each other. But it meant that my father ended up in the American Army. So he was in the American Army when I was born, and his best friend was called Wayne. Yeah, no, you're still laughing, that's fine. Okay, so, and Wayne with my dad actually got into the Army between VE Day and VJ Day, so he could have ended up in the South Pacific, in action in South Pacific. But in actual fact, he ended up in Britain, even though he'd lived in Britain for at least 20 years himself. So he got overseas pay for being in Britain, which was a gag in the family that nobody ever forgot and kept teasing him about for the rest of his life. You got overseas pay by staying here. Anyway, he was in a place called the American University, so he didn't exactly see action, quite the opposite. So he was teaching GIs amongst how to read English books. I think Americans can usually read English, but anyway, he was, I don't want to sound offensive about that. Anyway, his best buddy was this guy called Wayne. Wayne C. Booth was his name. And I remember Wayne, and I remember letters going to and fro, and it was very exotic. America seemed very exotic if you were brought up in the London suburbs in the 1950s. You kind of thought everybody was either a cowboy or a general. It was kind of hard to distinguish between the two. They could be either or both. So, Wayne suddenly appeared. He appeared with his family, and he was about 8 foot tall, possibly 9 foot tall, I'm not quite sure, with a great big beard and a great big voice and big teeth, and a lovely wife called Phyllis and 3 children. And Wayne, we discovered, was in fact teaching at university, as was my dad, nearly. Not quite, but anyway, nearly. And he was said that he was interested in the self-conscious narrator, which didn't mean a lot to me as a 10-year-old. I kept hearing this phrase, the self-conscious narrator. And my dad going, this is really interesting, Wayne, this is really interesting. The self-conscious narrator, my. Anyway, just to cut a very long story, just slightly less long, Wayne C. Booth then published a book called The Rhetoric of Fiction, which if anybody has done an English degree, either at a degree level, MA or PhD, you will be compelled to read Wayne C. Booth, The Rhetoric of Fiction, because it was a breakthrough book, because it talked about the self-conscious narrator. That was a surprise for you there. I just threw that in. So, yeah, I'm named after this incredibly famous guy within the world of English literature, but it always has that reaction that, because Waynes became, in Britain, it was always the lad in school in the 80s who was just causing more trouble than anybody else. So, everybody would leave and you'd hear the teacher going, Wayne, I don't want to have to talk to you again. And you, Darren. There was the pair of them, Darren and Wayne. And so, of course, I would go, is he talking to me? No, it's not. Anyway, we'll leave it off there. That's the Wayne bit anyway, yes. Yeah.
It's funny that you mention about, Wayne C. Booth's book being thrust into every undergraduate's hand. When I went back to college, when I was 36, very late in life, to study English, my best friend then, who has sadly died, thrust into my hand her copy of The Rhetoric of Fiction by Wayne C. Booth.
There you go.
I'm taking credit for it. Yeah, that's right.
And here I am, with my own book.
Yeah, and we share a very sad story, me and Wayne. We both lost our sons about the same age, and had beautiful conversations about that. So I feel a great bond with Wayne. So, yes.
Michael, I'm going to come back on your family, grandfather's name and father's name, but I'll speak to Sheela before that. Yeah? Sheila's book, What's in Her Name, is the reason for this title of the talk today. Sheela Banerjee and I, as you found things you share with Sheila's books and stories, we come from the same surname group. Banerjee is actually Bandhopadhyay, and from Bandhopadhyay is Batabyal. These are very differently pronounced names, but what you see in English is very different. I read Sheila's book about a week back, and I told my wife of 15 years that read this book to understand me. How beautifully she almost a forensic examination of a name to bring out a history of her people, migration, movement, colonialism, which Michael does in big, broad strokes. Sheela started from one particular point and went. The one I want to stress on today, Sheela, is Bandhopadhyay to Banerjee, the colonial process and how you feel about saying Banerjee instead of Bandhopadhyay. Let's start with that one first. There's many other things to talk about. Let's start with colonialism. It's a favorite topic of ours.
Yeah, I'm interested in it.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, well, I need to start with, Banerjee is not my real name. It's a name that was given to us by the British because they couldn't be bothered to pronounce the actual name, Bandhopadhyay. And
Or Batabyal.
Or Batabyal.
Even you can't.
I can't say that. And really, so I feel like I've been carrying around for my entire life a name that is a name of my colonial oppressors. And also, it's got a faintly comical air about it. Banerjee, Chatterjee, there were all these names that were essentially Hindu Brahmin names, and I'll come on to that because it's about the caste system, which is something that I was born and brought up within, that I also really loathe. But going back to the colonial part of Banerjee first, it was originally Bandhopadhyay, and this was at a time when the British came over to India to basically extract our wealth and, impose their military and economic and cultural might over us. And this happened in West Bengal, which is where I'm from. And so names like Bandhopadhyay, Chattopadhyay, Mukhopadhyay, Gangopadhyay got changed into Banerjee, Chatterjee, Mukherjee, Ganguly.
See why, though? They're tough names.
They're tough names, but come on, have some respect. But also, I think there's a bigger point to it in that the fact that you feel that you can completely alter my name is a symbol of the kind of hegemonic power of the British in terms of military might, in terms of the ruthless kind of rule that they had over India. Just to throw out
naming of things, places. Well, this is the part of the colonial hegemony, isn't it?
It plays a huge role. And if you go to Kolkata now, in terms of names, in terms of street names, not just people's names, the streets were named after the colonial rulers. And, so there's Dalhousie Square, which is named after Lord Dalhousie, who was a big figure in the colonial government. There's Clive Street, which
Curzon
was
Street.
Curzon Street. And these names were changed by the West Bengal government after independence, but it was a long process and people kept, even when I was there in the 70s, people kept referring to these streets by their old names, and I think it's a kind of
still do.
And it's a kind of symbol, I think, also that the imperial consciousness had also, seeped into our brains, and it's hard to shake off. And I think our names that we carry around are a kind of emblem of that kind of ideological colonization that took place.
Thank you, Sheela. In this book, you also have spoken of your friends' names, and there's one particular name where Marcel Agatsky's story, where there are loads of parallels with your story. Would you both want to? And this shows how names can reveal histories. Like somebody you are writing about, your friend, has uncanny parallels with your story. Can we talk of that?
Yeah. I mean, when I wrote, so my book is not just my name, it's about mine and 5 of my closest friends' names. And I think, not surprisingly, I have become very good friends with basically other immigrant, they were children when we became friends, but, Greek Cypriot, Jewish, Sri Lankan, and obviously there's a kind of feeling of outsiderishness that we've kind of latched onto one another. And one of my very close friends from when I was 16 is called Marcella Gatsky, and we went on a kind of voyage of discovery around her Jewish name, Gatsky. And it was her great-grandparents that came over from Tsarist Russia, and I think there are incredible similarities with your own family story. They were living in immense poverty in the late 1800s in the Pale of Settlement, where the Russian authorities had basically completely corralled the Jewish population and kept them in a state of poverty, in a condition of apartheid. And then there were terrible pogroms at the turn of the century. And her family escaped in a horse and cart. And there's only fragments of memories, of orally transmitted memories of, giving birth on a kind of stinking hold of a ship and then living in Whitechapel, with 9 children, 3 of whom ended up in an orphanage, which is similar to your father's story, and also where my friend Marcella ended up. Marcella and I met at Harrow Weald Sixth Form College in 1984, and there'd been...
And I went to Harrow Weald County Grammar School.
Which was it was the same building, basically. And there'd been an amazing trajectory from grinding poverty to a fairly comfortable Northwest London Jewish middle-class life. But it's that story that I tell, and I think with you, there's similarities in those fragments of memory, and how do you create a story out of that, not just for a book, but also for your children and for the people that come afterwards?
Yes, that's right. So just on names and on what people call Jewish names, mostly they're not Jewish. It's just people think they are. Which is fine. It's just, I see people say it, Epstein or something, and they go, oh, that's a Jewish name. Mostly they're German or Polish names, and if you go to Germany or Poland, then you find all sorts of people have those names. So one of the Nazis' great ideologues was in fact called Rosenberg, and he most certainly wasn't Jewish. He was kind of one of Hitler's right-hand mans, Alfred Rosenberg. So how come there are Ashkenazi Jews like me walking around with German names? The word Rosen just means roses. It's a nice, pretty little name. You can applaud that if you like. No, it's all right, don't worry. But anyway, in fact, I studied German at school, and we had, she was quite curious, the German teacher, and she tried to teach by immersion technique without immersing us. If you had the experience of learning a language, some people do the whole thing in the other language, and some people don't bother. They just do the English, and then every now and then burst out with a bit of French. Yeah, very good, well done. So anyway, but this teacher used to combine the two. So she'd go, nun bitte, today we're doing alles zusammen. Now we're all going to do a little Lied, a German Lied, Deutsche Lied, a little song, we're going to do Brahms Wiegenlied. It's Brahms Lullaby, and she had this little giggle that sort of suddenly appeared from nowhere. Anyway, she was going to teach us Brahms Lullaby, which you all know, and you're going to join in with in a minute. All right. Anyway, so she stood out the front. Her name was Miss Joseph, and she asked to be called Fräulein Joseph, Miss Joseph, And she said, and now we're going to do Brahms Wiegenlied, and I'm going to sing it to you. And she had this little high piping voice. And so it begins, as you well know, Guten Abend, gute Nacht, mit Rosen bedacht. So when she got to the Rosen bit, she fell on the floor giggling. All right, it was too much for her, so she went, it's a Rosen, das ist Rosen, that's Rosen, and he's here, he is here, Rosen ist here, Rosen sind here, like that. And I remember, I was about 15, kind of looking at her like this, you see. And the reason, apart from being a yobbo, which I was, and a lout, or a lobus, as you'd say in Yiddish, all right, so the fact that I was just sitting like that, well, I had 2 good reasons. One, that she had taught my brother for 4 years, and he has the same name. That's quite a surprise for you, but he had the same name. So she was acquainted with the name Rosen. So I'd have thought she'd have got over it, but she obviously hadn't. And she had another reason. She had actually taught with my dad for 3 years. And yes, his name's Rosen as well. So she had had 7 years of experience of Rosen before she got to Brahms' Wiegenlied with me in 1961. But anyway, that was my experience of that. But the name, the reason why Jews, Ashkenazi Jews like me, have German names is because between about 1780 and 1820, in what we now call Germany didn't exist then, there were many principalities, and before then, Jews didn't have equal rights. But in order for the emancipation, so-called, of Jews, that was the Napoleonic name, because remember Napoleon occupied a whole chunk of what we now call Germany, Westphalia and so on, that for Jews to be emancipated, they had to take on German names. Yes, and that was part of it in order to then have the right to employment and other equal rights within these German principalities. But you had to buy them. You had to buy the names. And so that was one aspect. So if you didn't have the money, they used to give you insulting names. So you might hear people with names that possibly don't even know they're insulting. So I was once in a school and a girl said to me that her name was Kaufpisch. Well, if you know German, that means sell piss. So it was a parody of Kaufmann, which is a merchant or a shopkeeper, Kaufmann, or yes, a merchant. So it was a parody of it. Some people have been called Hinkedigger, which literally means a hunchback, or Ochsenschwanz, which means ox tail, but you can think of the euphemism of what a tail is. I'll leave that little anatomical detail with you for a moment, those of you who are acquainted with the male anatomy. So anyway, so Ochsenschwanz and so on. But I was one of the lucky ones. We got Rosen, which, as I say, means roses. But there's a little bit of a hint that there's a cultural memory there, that one of the Hebrew ways of naming people is using a patronymic. So you'll hear people called Ben something, that's son of, and it's nearly always the son of and then the father's surname. So Ben, in this case, people think it may have been a matronymic, Ben Rosa. So Ben Rosa is a matronymic named after the mother, and that people kept a cultural memory. So even though they were forbidden to use the Hebrew name, they kept a cultural memory by choosing a German name that had an echo of Rosa. If you ask why did Rosen exist as a name in Germany, people think it's because it was one of the trade names, all right, that it was linked to the rosewater trade, which was the main perfume industry in medieval times. So that's a little route through to the name. So there we are. I can talk for hours about that sort of thing, but I'll stop now.
Sheela, before I come to you, Michael, just to carry on in this zone of what the stories that you're telling. So when I read, so they call you Pisha.
Oh, yes.
And this morning I heard you on the audiobook which your father has written, Are You Still Circumcised?
Yeah, that's one of my father's jokes. That's
and
right.
then
Yeah.
Rosen's Almanac, especially with they call you Pisha. I had this feeling, as I was telling you about, that I sat around your kitchen table listening to your parents and your brothers talk, and you talk.
Yes.
And this stories cascade, but there are words which keep coming back, and words that you follow. Why are words so important to you? And you've written a book on this.
Yes.
And what histories comes out through words?
That's right. Well, I mean, I grew up in a home that many of you grew up in, where when you're very young, you don't know what words were English and what words were in this other language. You just thought there was this flow of words. So my mother would say, we had to do, me and my brother, we had to do the drying up. My parents were communists, so they thought that it was all for the collective. They were very good on slogans like that. So it was very Stalinist, it was. So all for the collective, the boys will do the washing up. It was basically a way of my old man to get out of doing it, because he would just, at the end of every meal, he'd go, must press on. And then he'd leave the room, and so the collective didn't really apply to him, but so he was obviously at a higher level in the nomenclature of of the commune. But anyway, so he headed off to the front room while me and my brother did the washing up. And Mum would say, there's a clean schmutter in the drawer, you see. So I thought that was the word for a drying up cloth, a schmutter. That was an English word. I mean, I didn't know it was anything else. So I'd go to school and I'd say, hey, you know when you're flicking, you like that with the schmutter, when you're supposed to be doing the drying up. And my friends would go, with the what? I said, well, it's the schmutter. And they said, what's a schmutter? And I said, well, the thing you dry up with. And they go, no, that's a tea towel. So I go home and I go, Mum, my friends at school, they say that it's called a tea towel. And Mum said, no, it's a schmutter. So Mum was very good at explaining Yiddish to me. So she would say, for example, you don't want to go out looking like a schloch. And I'd say, well, what's a schloch? And she'd say, well, the thing you don't want to look like. So it's very clear immediately then. It's very good language teaching. Or she'd walk into me and my brother's bedroom and say, this place is a Mishida monk. And I'd say, what's a Mishida monk? She'd say, well, this place. So I know what a Mishida monk is. It's me and my brother's bedroom, you see. So I know. So it's always very clear. And she said, you don't want to end up like the Michelsons. What? Who are the Michelsons? The Michelsons were so poor, they were so poor, do you know, that Mr. Michelson, he didn't even own a market stall. He was just a schlepper. What's a schlepper? No, he just schlepped the stuff from the lockup and the lorry to the market stall. That's how poor he was. Mum, we live in Pinner. There are no market stalls in Pinner, Mum, let alone schleppers. You don't want to end up like the Michelsons. So anyway, that was my introduction to Yiddish. Yes, that's right. It's very clear, very clear.
But you went back to it at 79 years of age.
Yeah, but you're 78 actually.
78.
So let's
so
be
sorry.
accurate. Yeah, so, when people chair and get facts wrong, it's very worrying. Yeah, that's right. So, I did. I thought I'd like to know how my parents and grandparents, how they thought. So I thought, but there was a slight problem that, well, plenty of you will be familiar with the fact of a language written in non-Roman script. Well, Yiddish is supposed to be written in Hebrew script, all right? It's a Germanic language, but it's written in Hebrew script. And the thing was, I ran away from Hebrew classes. I was kidnapped by a boy. I was chapped, as you would say in Yiddish, in the playground. He came up to me and he said, you are, aren't you? And I said, what? And he said, Jewish. And I said, yeah, I think so. I mean, you don't know for certain, do you? So, well, I didn't. Anyway, so I was only 5. So anyway, I went home and I said, Mum, are we Jewish? Mum said, yeah. I said, Peter Keller says that I've got to go to Cheder, that's Hebrew classes, at the synagogue that's in the Methodist church, because they haven't built the synagogue yet. And Mum said, oh, that's nice. So why my communist, atheist mother, Jewish mother, but anyway, said, oh, that's nice, I've never figured out. Anyway, so I ended up going to Hebrew classes with the beautiful Peter Keller's mum, and I only got to 3 letters. I'm going to teach you one now. It looks a bit like a 7, and there's a dot over the top is one way, and a dot in the middle. And Mrs. Keller said, think of the dot as a football, and when a football lands on your head, you say, oh. And when a football lands in your kishkas, that's your belly, in your kishkas, you say, ooh. Oh, ooh. Do it with me. Oh, ooh. Lovely. So it's a 7 like that with a dot over it. That's it. Anyway, I got that far, and then there was the Cheder outing to Chessington Zoo. I don't know whether all Cheders go to Chessington Zoo, but anyway, that's what we did. And they shouted at me. They shouted at me because I went off on my own. And the woman, I remember saying to me, you've ruined everyone's afternoon now. And I was so ashamed that I couldn't face going back to Hebrew classes. So when I started doing the Yiddish classes, I only knew 3 letters. And all the others, they knew all like, it's about 40 of them. And they knew all the others because they'd been to Hebrew, hadn't been to Chessington Zoo, you see. So I was at a great disadvantage. But I can say important things. I can say you can't dance at 2 weddings with 1 bum. So men kann nicht tanzen auf 2 Chazanas mit ein Tuches. So anyway, remember that. It's very useful. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
I want to share important knowledge with you.
It's brilliant. Now we all know. But Sheela, you had to learn Bangla at home. You were brought up as a Bengali girl
Yeah.
in a small English suburb,
Yeah.
working class suburb.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and sort of, I didn't have to learn it. I just did know it, and so I grew up. Basically, as soon as I started speaking, I was speaking both languages, and so that was the thing about sort of growing up. It was within my house. We lived in Hayes in a semi-detached house, me, my mum, and my dad, and we were with in a kind of extended family. It was all Bengali, and in a way, that's what I kind of look at when I'm kind of looking at the question of what it was like to carry around a name like Sheela, for example. I'm really what I'm thinking
It's
about.
an old Bengali name, isn't it?
It is an old Bengali name. You wouldn't think so, because Sheela's also a very common English name, obviously, and almost kind of comically common. And it was like, why is this little Indian girl living in 1970s Hayes carrying this very English name? And obviously, when you kind of look at the roots of that is because, my parents are essentially Bengali immigrants in 1967 when I was born, who are searching around for a name that will fit into this kind of alien culture which they're in and trying to adapt to. And it's really a question of power. And you often find that there are loads of names like Sheela, like Anita or Rita, because it's about that thing of having that Bengali culture at home, but also, and speaking Bengali, eating Bengali food, all the kind of songs that I grew up listening to were Bengali. But outside the world, my parents were living in quite a tough world, and they knew that when they named me. It was 1967. It's a few months away from when Enoch Powell will make his Rivers of Blood speech. And when they named me, names put you in a particular place and time. And that time of 1960s Britain, when they named me, was when my father found himself in Wolverhampton for many years. And so he arrived here as a 22-year-old with his name, his Bengali name, Balaji, which means Vishnu, a highly revered 3,000-year-old name. He was named after the Balaji temple by his priest father. And he was in Wolverhampton, a place where if you wanted to get a place to live, you were faced with all those signs saying, no coloureds, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. It was, the time of not just Enoch Powell, but also a few years later down the road in Smethwick with that infamous slogan that the Tories campaigned on about, if you want an N-word for a neighbour, don't vote Labour. And also just personally, he had a lot of difficulties with his name. Nobody could pronounce it. When he went for a job and got offered a job, the boss said basically he had to ask every white person in the office whether or not they'd be comfortable with my dad working there. In order to have that job. And this is not an environment in which, as a sort of lone Bengali man in this quite viciously racist environment, you're going to insist on saying that you've got to pronounce my name right. So he changed his name, but in the house, sorry, going back to your question, yeah, it was completely Bengali. And in a way, that Bengali side of my name, the Sheela, it's Sheela with two E's, I've tried to keep hold of partly through the language. And so even though I'm married to an Englishman, I have tried to teach my daughter Bengali, not just really, it wasn't really out of a sense of huge, like I've got to hold on to my culture. It was really like I couldn't express a certain part of me that was deep within. In English, that's not me because I was, when I started speaking in the family, I was speaking Bengali, and it's like that part of myself is missing if I don't speak in Bengali. So I was really, when I read Rosen's Almanac, and you've got the whole section on learning Yiddish, it was really touching about kind of wanting to feel and think in the way that your ancestors felt. And without the language, there's something of that missing. You don't feel it quite without the language.
Here I want to touch upon this thing in your book where you said how the context of the name changes the moment you reach Bengal. Can you just take us through that? Because this is the migration moment, right? Here it means something or is ridiculed, and there it's a different kind of context.
Yeah, so I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, actually, as sort of as a Bengali immigrant family. There was always that kind of yearning, especially from my father's side, to return. Not so much a yearning, a duty as well. So we always were going backwards and forwards between here and India. And here I was living in Hayes, that was next door to Southall. At one point in the late 70s, early 80s, it was crawling with skinheads. It was a time when really Asians were the most kind of reviled community I felt in Britain. And this was a name, Sheela Banerjee, that was not comfortable to carry around. And also there were killings on the streets in London then. And, you know, during the Southall riots, which happened around that time, I used to be in my house in Hayes and feeling quite afraid. But as soon as we went to India, as soon as you get on that Aeroflot plane with your airline food in front of you and you're going over the, you know, whatever mountains you're going over, my name slowly starts to change. So that by the time I land at Dom Airport in Kolkata, it has become a completely different beast. So
3 huts then.
the 3 huts, it was 3 huts then, and now it's a glittering kind of part of a megalopolis. But, you know, Sheela is no longer the name of, you know, these older English women that made me feel inferior. Sheela is a very common Bengali name, and it comes from the word sheel, which is the black stone that people use to do their pujo to the god Shiva, or to Satyanarayan pujo, which is a puja to Vishnu. And Banerjee, oh my goodness me, Banerjee had so much undeserved social capital, because Banerjee is, as we were saying, in West Bengal, your name determines your caste, and I'm sure lots of you know this already. And Banerjee is a Bengali Brahmin name, which means that you are the top tier of the Bengali caste system, and even within that layer, there's another layer that it's part of that's very elite. They are, I think they're known as Kulin Brahmins. And so when we went back to India, we went to a place, we come from a place called Chandanagar, which is on the banks of the river Hooghly. And my parents came from 2 very well-established families there, and there was this automatic kind of respect for them based on their surname. Looking back, you know, I was 11 then. I thought it was quite odd, and I felt a bit uncomfortable about it. Looking back now, I find the caste system completely abhorrent. There's lots about the Hindu kind of way of life that I love and respect. But my grandparents were part of this system where, in terms of the psychogeography of this little town where they lived in an area called Narua, which is a little village-like area. It was 1 lane, essentially. And it was originally called Chatterjee Lane. Chatterjee is another Brahmin name, and it was just full of Brahmin households, just upper caste households. Banerjees, Chatterjees, Mukherjees, Patoks. And on the other end of town, in the worst part of town, you know, in absolute poverty, were the Dalits, who were what are called manual scavengers, who, again, are identified by surname in a really kind of inhumane system of social segregation that, for me, you know, has caused generational trauma. But yes, so it was, my name became this completely sort of different entity as soon as I went there. And my parents became different entities. They were so at ease there.
Confident.
Yeah, really confident.
I mean, my wife says that the moment my feet touches the Delhi airport, my walk changes.
Yeah.
What do you do? Do you sort of...
There's a swag.
Yeah.
There's a swag.
Imagining it, yes. Is it kind of a Bollywood thing? Is it?
I'll show you once we
Yes,
cross into the doors.
I can sort of see it, yes.
I'll imagine that as a Delhi throwback.
I want to see that. Yeah, that's lovely.
I have been shown that dreaded time thing, so we'll come to the last question and the important, the political trope of this conversation, which I want to bring us to. And I'm trying to see how to get there. So reading Sheela's book made me think about my name, which is Somnath, but actually Shomnath. But I say Som so that all of you understand and it's easy. That is,
So it's easier than sh?
the Shah is in Bangla, but if you say S-O-M, no one says Shom. So I have stopped saying Shom,
Right.
right? So
Did your parents just spell it with an S? When yes, and
because
that's
it's understood to be.
yeah. There are
you know,
three different shs in
And-
Bengali because they love the sound sh, and
There
so
was a boy in my school whose name is S-U-N-I-L.
Shunil.
Well,
That is Sunil.
we used to look at it, but we always called him Chenille. Chenille, you know, North London. Chenille.
Chanel.
We didn't do the last L, right? We just didn't bother with that. So he was Chenille Das. So we called him Chenille. And then we'd look at it and go, how do you go from Sunil into Chenille? We didn't, yes. So it's similar with you.
Similar with me.
Similar.
Yes.
I got it. Thank you.
Thank you. But
Harrow Weald. We are, I can
it's
sing
the
this
best.
cool song if you like. No, it's
No, thanks. Later.
later. When he does his,
so I'm the chair. Now
Yeah.
I'll talk.
of course.
I've got to stop him now. Right. So, to come back to the overall politics of this conversation, I was thinking about the time how your parents named you and the constraints they must have faced as you elaborated in your book. And I was thinking of how I named my son. He was born here. I'm married to a white British woman. And there's a different kind of confidence in me, which your parents wouldn't have had. And I'm trying to think about migrant experiences through the ages. So my son's name is Robi Joe. Robi is Bangla for son. Robi is also the shortened name of Rabindranath Tagore, the first poet, Nobel laureate. And my son went to Tagore's university town, grew up a bit there. But his name is Robi Joe, Joe being the English equivalent. So over a drink, we named him very quickly. Robi Joe. Done, right? There was no thinking through. And I don't say this lightly. So when I read your version and your parents' thoughts and my thoughts, they've changed a lot in the last 40, 50 years. So there is a kind of progress, sometimes which we don't acknowledge, maybe. And then the conversations which your book reveals about what your parents faced when they were first courting. So could we just end in this conversation where the migrant experience from their time to our times, and what do you think has moved on, what hasn't moved on, the conversations now? Because the point is that all political parties, the rhetoric around migration and movement and forced migration, economic migration is very stark. But has there been movement? Are we going backwards in time?
Well, some of the things you were talking about there, Sheela, I mean, for better or for worse, I follow somebody, I think his name is Rupert. Rupert Lowe, I think his name is.
Oh.
And I follow him on social media. And every day he pours out this bile. I shouldn't really, it's bad for me.
I read the Telegraph
Do you?
every day, just to know the opposite side.
Yes, well, I read this stuff and I just think, I mean, it is the same as the Smethwick election. That's what it feels like.
It feels really dangerously
And-
close that we're slipping slowly, not even that slowly. When you have the Prime Minister echoing Enoch Powell's speech with his Island of Strangers comment, with his description of recent immigration as a squalid chapter, that is so dangerous. And also, with the riots last year didn't appear out of nowhere. When you have politicians that are day in, day out, stood in front of a podium with the British flags by their sides, with Stop the Boats, presenting immigrants basically as an invasion, as squalid, as really undesirable, then it's going to have an impact on people's actual lives in this country. And I think, me and my friends grew up with the kind of horrors of that around us, but also people died. You know, Gurdeep Singh Chuggar was an 18-year-old student who was murdered in broad daylight in Southall Broadway in the summer of 1976. You know, after quite a few years from that Enoch Powell era, and you know, throughout the 70s, of loads of anti-immigrant rhetoric, vicious.
Aftab Ali in Whitechapel.
Aftab Ali in Whitechapel. And these, you know, what you see going on in Northern Ireland now, you know, these are really frightening times. And those headlines, when I was writing my book about, you know, looking at the context of my feelings about myself and my name, I was looking at the kind of headlines they had about the Ugandan Asians who came over here in the 70s. And the headlines were uncannily similar to the headlines you get about, you know, asylum seekers now. It was, you know, about Ugandan Asians. It was don't let them in, how they're luxuriating in taxpayer-funded hotels. This thing about hotels, this bloody obsession with hotels. And it's really nasty, and it's really quite frightening. And I think from history, you know, if you're thinking about the pogroms in Russia, if you think about the partition in India, citizenship is always, you know, contingent. It's never stable, you know, and you always have to fight for it. And it feels like a dangerous time in the world.
There's a language element to it, because they keep flagging up the idea that these migrants can't speak English. And of course, I immediately think of my forebears, who arrived speaking sometimes 4 languages: Polish, Yiddish, German, and maybe a form of Czech or Russian or something like that, various languages. You know, I know, for example, that my father's uncle, who was killed in Auschwitz, he could speak Polish, Yiddish, French, and he wrote to his relatives in German. So, you know, there would be just one example. Well, when all my relatives, great-grandparents, they all come from Greater Poland, mostly, they all come from there. Well, they would have arrived, and none of them would have been able to speak English. But of course, the kids go to school, and then they learn English. I mean, my mum's first language wasn't English, it was Yiddish. I didn't know that, I found out when I was 10. But, you know, they talk about it as if it's impossible for generations, you know. I mean, you're doing quite well, all considered,
I think I'm doing quite well, yeah.
Yeah, and me too. And you're doing quite well as well, actually. I mean, you know, the three of us, and we've
managed.
It's amazing. I mean, if Rupert Lowe was here, we'd say,
professors,
how have we done? Have we done all right? I mean, our English seems, you know, it's okay, isn't it?
And we write in English.
Yeah, you were. I know, it's incredible, isn't it?
200 books.
Yeah, and they talk as if, like, you know, and of course there is the great irony of the Brits abroad, you know. You only have to sort of spend a little bit of time in France and Spain, and you find the British colonies there, and they kind of go, whoa, no, we don't speak that. Oh, no, we don't speak French. No.
But this is one thing I don't understand, and you might be able to tell me in words what it means. When a British person goes and lives abroad, they're expats. And when come in here, we're migrants. What's the difference?
We're better. Sorry, I don't know whether you picked that up. No, sorry. This is about, you know, it's about people of colour and white people, and we're better. So that's the point. So we as in me, I'm white, so not you, sorry. So the point is, we go abroad, and then we're not migrants. Sometimes we can be émigrés. So that's a little bit posher, you see. You've got migrant, immigrant. It sort of goes, it's a little thing, it's expat, émigré, or émigré. Then there's migrant, then there's immigrant. You see, migrant is slightly better than immigrant. Once you get to immigrant, then that's them, fully there. Refugee, asylum seeker, you're coming down, asylum seeker, that's
okay, right. I'm going to stop there.
And then boat.
Who knows where we reach?
We get to boat people on the bottom there. That's, yeah. So it's all carefully coded. Yeah. They know all that. They use the code. They use it. They operate all to and fro, up and down the ladder, and think we haven't noticed. Or perhaps you haven't noticed. One or the other. Yes.
I try and not notice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this can carry on, this jamming, but I have, you know, the lady there has been frantically.
Is she doing the sign? Is she doing
like
the
5 minutes? Down.
Beth is a radio producer. She has to do it
now
as well.
Question time.
Questions.
Whoever gets a mic first. There's a lady out there.
In the Yiddish class, they say, Frages bitte, and that means questions, please. Frages bitte.
Thank you so much with what the panel said. I'm Bengali and I grew up in northwest London.
What's your name?
Joyita Mukherjee.
Joyita.
Oh, it's a Mukherjee.
And I just want to say, it's never too late to claim your name back. So I have a younger brother. He's never going to call me my name Joyita. My parents, when they pass away, there's nobody who's going to call me by my name. So about 10 years ago, I had a midlife crisis. And so whenever I introduce myself to anyone now, I say my Bengali name. And, it's a part of my identity and my heritage. And also, I'm British. So the way that it was spelt is Jaita, which is not the way it's pronounced. Yeah. But there are so many Irish names that are like that. Aoife, Niamh. It's not uncommon.
No.
So actually, I can maintain my British identity, because I am, at the same time as maintaining my Indian name.
Tell her.
Wonderful.
You'll do it yet, Sheela.
Thank you for this very, very nice session. The same as her, I completely resonated. I am Chatterjee, Chattopadhyay.
As a Brahminical takeover.
You're ganging up. The Mukherjees, Chatterjees, we're getting it's a whole thing
So
here.
basically what happened was, my thing got a bit more complicated because I grew up in north of India. Yeah. So my parents had a bit more difficulty. So they changed from Chattopadhyay to Chatterjee. And one of my ancestors had got a title, Chakravarti. So what they did was, they made it Manali Chakravarti, okay? To gel with the Delhi and Baroda and different parts where I grew up with. And then what happened was, then I came here. And I was completely happy with that, but my name was always spelled Monali. Rather than Manali. So when I was taking my board exams, I said, why don't we convert this to Manali? That resonated more. But then I came here. And now I'm like hell-bent on keeping my Monali Chakraborty. As soon as I go back to India, I become Monali Chattopadhyay.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
It's like I completely got everything you said. So,
Sheela, what have you done? You have opened a can of worms.
No, but I really, with Joyita, especially when you were talking, in fact, I've avoided that. My parents kind of, in a way, achieved what they set out to do. They gave me this very British name, Sheela, and I've not really had any problems with it because people know how to pronounce it. But my cousin is called Molshumi, and oh my God! So with the Molshumi, it was the S. It was the problem with the S. They didn't put the H in, and so she turned into Masumi, Mausumi, and this beautiful Bengali name, named after the film star Molshumi Chatterjee, was completely butchered. She had a nightmare time in her Norfolk private school, with the teachers who absolutely refused to, wouldn't even call her Mousemy. Some of them refused to call her name. They just gave her a different name. And so now she's had to shorten it. She's shortened it to Mo. And first of all, she turned it to M-O-U, Mo, and people kept calling her Mao. So then she got rid of the U and is just Mo, M-O, which is actually also shortening of Muhammad. So that's a problem as well. And finally, she has now decided she wants to reclaim, like you, she wants to reclaim the Molshumi because that is her name,
My mother's father is the name he seems to have been given when he was born. His name was Fredman Isakovsky. And at some point or another, the family decided it sounded too Jewish, given anti-Semitism. And so they changed it, and his name became Frank Friedman, which, of course, doesn't sound Jewish at all. So I could never quite figure that out. So, in fact, it was very curious looking at my mum's school magazines, because she's Isakovsky. She was Connie Isakovsky up to a certain point, and then suddenly became Friedman. So I kind of wondered what that was like for her, that she sort of suddenly changed from Isakovsky to Friedman for no particular reason, other than that her father's first name was Fredman.
Well, sometimes you
Get out of
just-
that one.
you might feel like a change, and that's the other thing. You know, people do want to kind of reinvent themselves, like you with the Wayne.
Yeah, we left that little bit out, that I decided change of identity when I switched school from Harrowweald to Watford Boys, and I decided to call myself, because I wanted to be American, M. Wayne Rosen. No, please, behave, come on. So there's a whole group of people who know me as Wayne, actually, because I thought it looked good, you know, M. Wayne Rosen, that's right. Very American.
We have two ready.
Okay.
A lot of my family seem to think that when the government, politicians, or anyone referred to immigrants, when Starmer said the island of strangers thing, as you mentioned, when Donald Trump said people are coming in and bringing crime and are bad for the US, in this current time, a lot of my Indian relatives seem to think that when immigrants are referred to, it doesn't refer to them. So my question is, if you had any advice or comments on the concept of a model minority and advice to persuade, like as in like, you know, that concept of a model minority and advice to persuade, you know, all immigrants and minorities to stand together.
Oh my goodness. Oh, can I?
Sheila, yeah, I'm not sure I fully understood, so you should.
So I think if I understand you rightly, you're talking about, you know, our parents or my parents, your parents, you know, that generation, they think of themselves as a kind of the legal, you know, right-thinking immigrants, and the ones that are coming in now are the problem, they're illegal. Yeah, and this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric and feeling amongst immigrants is such a problem. On a personal level, it's a real problem, because obviously I know what they went through as immigrants and the kinds of thoughts that they're having about, you know, people coming on boats, talking about asylum. I've had conversations at family gatherings about, you know, complaining about asylum seekers who are scrounging benefits, or, you know, again, the question of the hotels. And when it's your own immigrant family doing this, it's really confusing. And the only kind of thing I can think is partly, you know, unfortunately, it can be part of human nature. But the other thing that I do think in terms of my own family is that there was a desire to be close to the British, which was part of that colonial system of rule, which was to get certain sections of the Indian population and use them to actually rule. And in that process, there was a kind of protection and privilege to be had in adopting the language, the dress, you know, and the laws and the rules of the ruling class, but also some of the attitudes. And it's almost a sense of kind of safety through superiority as well. And I feel like it is part of a colonial mindset as well. And there were the British used a lot of racialized hierarchies in their process of rule. So, I mean, that's one of the things. But I'm kind of with that gentleman over there. It's a real problem.
Nothing to add. Yeah. No, it's fine. I mean, no, nothing to add.
Are we kind of ready to... Is it time over?
One last question.
Can we have a...
Vragen bitte.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
My name is Ashish Basu. I'm not going to go into the Bengali part of things because I am Bengali. I have a question for Michael, though. And the question is, I have a lot of Jewish friends, part of whom have what we call in Canada, I live in Canada, typical Jewish names, you know, like you mentioned, Friedman. But there are many who have what one would call an English name. You know, it could be Cooper, it could be Smith. How did that come about?
A bit like it happened in my mother's father's family, is that in America, so I can speak in terms of Anglophone cultures, it was felt that if you had obviously, quote, Jewish, and they weren't usually a Hebrew name, they were usually, as I said, either a Polish, a Russian, or a German name. So my mum's maiden name, Isakovsky, just, I think if I'm right, it means son of Isaac. But it's a, you know, you can find a Russian composer called Isakovsky. So those names, they felt marked Jews out, and therefore you were less likely to get a job, or that you would get discriminated against because you carried one of these names, plus the fact it was thought that some of them were difficult to pronounce, so it overlaps with what you're saying. So what happened was that Jews tended to gravitate towards some English names, and so they clustered around some names. So you can find quite a few Jews called Barnet for some reason. I don't know how that ended up. Barnet, which in Cockney rhyming slang means your hair. Barnet, fair hair. So for some reason, a lot of Jews ended up with Barnet. Davis seems to be another one. I don't know how that happened, but mostly it happened between about 1900 and 1950, across those 50 years. That's when people adopted those straight English names. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry, time's up. I'm not allowed to. Yes, you see, my hands are tied now. Thank you very much for attending, Michael, Sheela. Thank you very much.
Thank
Books.
you. Thank you very much. Ashenem dank, as you'd say in Yiddish. Ashenem dank.
Books of both Michael and Sheela will be on sale at the bookshop, and they will be signing, so please do come down there. That's it, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.